Today on our show, man, who created the Joker? We all think we know, but I think we found a mystery on the back of an old comic book page. This is something out of a comic book, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to sit around and talk to the one man who discovered perhaps the real secret origin of the Joker today on Fat Man on Batman. Welcome to Fat Man on Batman. I'm Kevin Smith. Marc Bernardin not here today, man, but that's okay because we've got a story for you kids. You might have heard this if you listened to the Fat Man on Batman podcast. We did an audio version of it, very, very long. It's like a 2-hour conversation. One of the greatest podcasts I've ever recorded. Podcast is one of the greatest podcasts I've ever recorded and stuff. Do yourself a favor, go listen to it. But a lot of people online were like, we want to see this fucking pages and stuff. So this is the forum for that kind of thing. Welcome to Fat Man on Batman. Matt Kennedy. Go to a 2-shot over here. That's a single. There you go. This is Matt Kennedy. Now, a lot of people are like, who's Matt Kennedy? Matt Kennedy is a very important individual, man. He's done a fucking fuck ton of things. He's my spiritual brother from another mother, man. He has lived many lives. Before we get into the key pieces of what we're going to talk about today, give him your geek bona fides, like how you got to this moment in time, because he's got a lot. This is good. Go.
Okay, so I'm the gallery director of La Luz de Jesus Gallery in Los Angeles, which is the gallery that started the lowbrow movement in Pop-Surrealism. Don't
throw it away like everyone knows the lowbrow movement in Pop-Surrealism. Tell them what that is.
So it's, if you're familiar with people like Marc or Robert Williams, the guy who did the cover to Appetite for Destruction, that all grows out of the Zap Comics underground comic movement and tattooists and animators. And we were the first gallery to really showcase that, and we became, ubiquitous with that for 20 years or so. And we'll be celebrating our 30th year this year.
30 years of this gallery. La Luz de Jesus is one of the premier, if not the premier, fucking art gallery for me in Los Angeles. I'm sure there are more cultured, or what would you call them, high-end and shit? This to me is fucking highbrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. The art that they sell at La Luz de Jesus, there's a picture of the place, man. It's wacko. They call it Soap Factory. That's a store that you could buy a bunch of fucking cool shit in. But in the back, there's the gallery itself. We actually shot there recently for this pilot thing we did called Hollyweed. But I've been going to this gallery forever. I have so much fucking artwork from this. So you've been working with these cats for how many years?
Oh, I started in 1991. Yeah, but I went into entertainment for a very long time.
Tell them how.
Okay, so I was working register at Soap Plant, which was then on Melrose.
Okay.
This is like 1990.
This one that we just showed is on
Hollywood Boulevard.
Hollywood,
yeah, we've been there
Hollywood.
for 20 years. But I was working register, and Mel Brooks just kind of walked in.
Give him a single. This is a great story. Single for this story. Go.
So Mel Brooks came into the store, just opened up the door and pointed at me and said, "Him!" And then went away, and I didn't recognize him at first. And this woman came in after him and said, are you free in half an hour for an hour, because Mr. Brooks would like to shoot with you? And I told her I'd love to, but I'm working. And the manager at the time, who was also my roommate, said, you have to go. She's like, I'll find somebody to cover for you, but you have to go do this. This is Mel Brooks. I was like, that was Mel Brooks? And we shot like a commercial for his Robin Hood Men in Tights, arguably the worst Mel Brooks movie. But I was happy as a clam.
So you were hired to do what? You were a guy who's like, I just saw this movie or something.
No, they put together groups of different types of people, and I was like part of the punk rock, heavy metal kids, and we were walking down the street singing We're Men in Tights.
That's wild. So you've been directed by Mel Brooks?
Yes.
How was that, man?
It was just cool. He's fast and efficient.
Right.
Yeah, and that actually led to me being an actor for years, like quite accidentally. And I had not thought about it for a while, and then went with a girl that I knew. I was also working at a bar at the time. And her boyfriend had scored a movie that a friend of mine had produced, and it was Natural Born Killers. And so we went and saw
Who was
this.
the friend? Was it Don?
Don Murphy.
Don Murphy,
yeah.
Producer.
Yep.
Producer. Don Murphy, producer of Natural Born Killers and a lot of things.
Yeah, Pupil, From Hell.
Yes.
And now the Transformers films.
That's right. His name's all over that shit. Yeah. So wait, so he said come, he brought you, what was it?
He had produced the film with Jane Hampshire at the time and gotten the script to Oliver Stone. He bought the Tarantino script.
Right.
And I think he put David Vilas or somebody on the rewrite, and it got made. It was queued up for Oliver Stone, and back then he was like, oh, I've got 3 movies ahead. And like, no, you have to make this next. And he's like, okay. And I ended up going to the premiere because I knew them, and afterwards this girl had a casting session, and so I just went with her, and I got tired waiting around, so I signed in and I just booked this job with Moshe Bracha, who had taken pictures of Janis Joplin and the Beastie Boys and Hendrix, and then I ended up getting her agency and going out on a lot of calls, and I acted for quite a while.
You're like fucking Forrest Gump, dude.
I know, I'm the Forrest Gump of pop culture.
Of pop culture in Los Angeles, because taking back to the comic book store, like tell them where you worked.
So that was Fantastic Store Comics.
Which is where?
It was on Highland and right above Hollywood Boulevard. And I worked with Gaston Dominguez, who would later open up Meltdown Comics.
Meltdown, for those that go to a two-shot, that were single, whatever the fuck. Those that don't know Meltdown, how can you not? Just enter Meltdown Comics in Google and see. It's one of the premier fucking comic book stores on the planet. And what's the dude's name? Gaston?
Gaston, yeah.
Great fucking dude. He worked with you.
Yeah.
And then one day was like, I'm going to open my own shop.
Yeah. I quit first, and but it was also the shop that they shot True Romance at.
What is it called?
Fantastic Store.
Fantastic Store. That's where so the scenes in True Romance when they're in the comic book store, that's fantastic, and it doesn't exist at all anymore.
No, not anymore. It was a black building with like the thing from the Fantastic Four would hang over it.
Yes.
And it was kind of a dump, but it was kind of a great shop. And
I was in it once, exactly once in my life, I think circa 1996 when I was dating Joey Adams. Like one day I drove past, I was like, holy shit, because I knew of, this is even pre-Meltdown, I think. I knew of course, Golden Apple and Heidi Ho in Santa Monica and House of Secrets. But this one this looked like a New York hole-in-the-wall comic book store. Yeah. And I remember going in and it was like, oh my God, this fucking place is the tits. Never went back and stuff, and then one day it was closed.
Yeah, it doubled for Detroit, so I mean, it had a certain decrepitude to it.
Yes.
And I love Detroit. But they shot there. They shot at Raji's. So when he walks out of the bedroom, it's supposed to be above the comic shop. It's actually the original Raji's, which was taken down in the '92 quake.
Holy shit!
But yeah, so I did the set design inside the comic shop for them, and I thought that because it was a Warner Brothers production, it was going to be Batman. But they called us the day before and said, no, it's all Spider-Man. And so I just did a Spider-Man wall for them.
Fucking weird, dude. So when you watch that movie, you're like, I did that.
Yeah.
I own a little piece of that.
Yeah.
All right.
And nobody cares.
No, but you do.
But I do.
Now we all do.
Yeah.
All right. So you have this weird, wonderful life. Where'd you come from originally? Tell them that.
I'm originally from Lynn, Massachusetts.
Okay. Masshole. Total masshole.
Total masshole.
And what brought you out to California?
I crashed my car in the snow, and I'm like, I am out of here. And I was like, I'm going to go be a rock star in L.A. and moved out.
Was that music? Music was the thing?
Yeah. So picture me like probably 40 pounds lighter and with long, Axl Rose hair. And I moved out with my best friend since kindergarten, a kid named Todd Harvey. And we came out together, and he got into a band really quickly, and I played with a couple of bands, one of which got signed, and we had a terrible name. It was called Abusement Park.
Abusement Park?
Abusement Park.
It's kind of metal.
Yeah, and they went through a bunch of lineup changes after I left, and actually got signed and did some soundtrack work, I think, on like Road Rules or something. But in that time, I discovered that I was much more drawn into what I was finding out about the LA art scene and even about Hollywood. And so I just kind of drifted in that direction. And it was cool. I ended up, after I quit at Fantastic Store, I went down to Melrose with a friend of mine. And he's like, oh, you're always talking about art. You should check out this place. And I went in, and there was a Joe Coleman show was up. And I had seen a Joe Coleman show in Boston, and just caught the tail end of it, but missed all the mayhem. And this great girl who was behind the counter, this is like 1991, and she had like full sleeve tattoo, and she was gorgeous.
Which now you'd walk, you see somebody in tattoos, you're like, whatever. But 1991, you're like, you're exotic. Where are you from?
Yeah. I mean, I'd never seen it before, and she was really, really nice. And they had put a tarp up because the show was coming down, and she let me go see it. And all the pieces were off the wall, but on the floor, and I could see this Joe Coleman paintings I'd never seen in person before. And she told me that there was this event that was that night, and I went down to the pier in Santa Monica because she told me that's where it was, and I just got on a bus and waited, and kind of didn't know exactly where it was, but I figured it out. And people that were there were like Robert Williams and Billy Shire, who owns Luz de Jesus and started Wacko. And the next day after that performance, where Joe blew himself up on the pier, basically.
Explain that.
He'd set explosives under his chest and just like light them off. like during a performance piece.
Was he okay?
Yeah, he's fine.
Holy fuck.
I mean, I wouldn't have done it.
yeah,
but
I know, right? But still, anything for an audience.
I
Like
know,
the big
yeah.
finish.
Yeah. So the next day I went back to that shop and asked for a job application, and I got hired in the bookstore, which was then called Soap Plant, and it was right on the corner of Melrose and Martel. And I worked there because two other guys that worked there were from Lynn, and they thought I was kidding. Like, who told you to write Lynn in the application?
Oh, they were like, you're also from Massachusetts?
Yeah. He's
Very
like,
specific
Who'd
part.
you know? Who'd you go to school with? You know, and I had the same friends that this kid had before he moved. So it
How
was pretty
weird,
cool.
small fucking world.
Kismet, yeah.
So you start working at La Luz at that point?
Yep.
What year is that?
Oh, like 91.
And they were
91,
there
92.
for how long on Melrose?
Billy had moved from Las Vegas and Silver Lake in 1980, I think. And Wacko was right next door to Soap Plant. And then he got a warehouse space a little bit further down the street. And people who remember classic Melrose will remember there was this like wall of mirrors that you would walk down this hallway off Melrose. And that's where Wacko got relocated. And then the gallery went upstairs. So you'd walk past the newsstand on Martel and up the stairs. And it was awesome. It was like, when I first walked in, I was like, you knew you were in someplace that did not exist anyplace else. Right. I mean, it was like a little bit of like Shambhala. I mean, it was, you walk up the stairs and there was weird symbols drawn on the stairs and you could smell incense. And when you got to the top, there was this counter that had like bones in it. And around the corner was like old ethnic folk art. And you could see.
That's one of those things where you're like, I'm from Massachusetts, man. This is what I fucking came for. Like, this ain't any place else. This is Los Angeles.
Yeah. You know, I was born in Salem, and Salem is Wichtown, USA now, you know, but
when you were a kid,
growing
not so
up,
much?
they didn't really wrap their head around we could be the Halloween capital of the world until after I was gone.
Really?
Yeah. Like, they would close the Witch Museum in October because they thought that the tourist season ended in September.
Meanwhile, it's just like you guys are party central for Halloween.
Yeah, and now it's crazy. It's like Mardi Gras in New Orleans. But the you know, you'd think that there'd be a little bit of that exotic nature, and it was sort of like a little bit of Crowhaven Corner, which was like the official Witch of Salem shop, and then everything else that you could imagine. And the bookstore was downstairs, and they had every book that you wanted to buy. And, you know,
still remains that way. Like if you go to Soap Plant, Wacko, La Luz de Jesus, it is a singular experience, retail experience. You walk into that store or any of that space, and you feel instantly like a kid who's getting away with something.
Yeah.
You're seeing something you shouldn't necessarily see. It's not horrible, like, oh, fucking headless children, but it's just, all of it's just so, like, I don't care who you are, you walk in that store, you do not feel edgy.
Yeah.
You immediately feel lame because you're just like, fuck, I thought I was the edge. I'm not the edge. I'm a fucking spoon. The edge is all around you in that place. It's very magical.
Yeah.
Like, really, like, in terms of stores I've been in my life, top 5 in terms of, like, I could go back. Every time I go back, it's something new.
Yeah.
There's always something worth buying. And even if you're like, all right, I bought all the crap, boom, there's a gallery show. So you right in the back, so you can go buy something that don't have a red tag on, and they got beautiful fucking pieces back there.
When I first got hired there, I mean, 2 of my coworkers were Holly Woodlawn, who just passed away.
Holy shit, really?
Holly was working at Wacko with Gorilla, who was actually another one of the Andy Warhol superstars. And I had an art project with Gorilla in the 90s doing silk screening stuff. But
you silk screened with a fucking Andy Warhol vet?
Yeah.
Dude, you are fucking Forrest Gump, man. That's nuts.
Well, there was and Scott Weiland, and Scott Weiland was still in Mighty Joe Young.
Really?
Yeah, and who also recently passed away.
Yeah, he just did a couple months ago.
But he was a cool, fun-loving guy, and I guess he missed a lot of work, so he got fired. But he trained me, I think, on 3 departments. I took over, I think, hair dye and like candles and maybe ceramics that were his departments, and I got brought in to replace him.
Fucking crazy, dude.
And it was just like the people that would walk in were amazing. It was like all your idols would walk in, and everybody from William Burroughs, who actually. William Burroughs actually bumped into me while I was bending over to pick up a book at La Luz at Soap Plant downstairs, and I was like, "What the hell?" And I was like, "Oh, it's William Burroughs." And
You're lucky you didn't take him down.
It's oddly okay.
Yes.
You know, like, that's fine. And you know, just everybody. It was Stephen. You know, Steve Perry came in and Axl Rose came in, and they had this weird conversation in the shop. And, you know, one of the other places that I was fortunate enough to work at later on was Hollywood Book and Poster.
Oh, my God. Another fucking amazing, goddamn iconic store in this town.
And Eric Hayden was a great guy. He
just passed away as well, right?
I know. Everybody. I'm like,
I don't want to be around you, dude. There's a lot of bodies in your wake.
I know. You got to get one of those masks. But, Yeah, it was a great place to be, and even at the time that I was there, and I feel like part of what I feel really lucky about is that it wasn't necessarily that I was at these places, but at the times that I was at these places was when things were really exciting, and like the indie film explosion was really starting to happen. You know, like Hal Hartley had been making movies in the late '80s, and Ted Hope would come in when he was in town.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, you were developing stuff with, you know, at Miramax, and there was a lot of people like Tarantino was coming in, and
I
you'd
love
see
that
all these
store.
people.
I saw that store, like, I think that store existed when I first went to Hollywood when I was a kid. And I remembered it to like when I went back to Hollywood in the early 90s and stuff after Clerks. And that was one of the first stores that I sought out. Anytime I needed a poster,
Yeah.
which oddly enough was often, you would go to that fucking store. And you would always gauge yourself as a filmmaker by whether or not your poster was up on the wall if your movie was coming out. Because they had everything. It was almost like they got them straight out the fucking bus stops and stuff. I remember one thing I've always regretted not buying was a gigantic fucking Batman Returns Michael Keaton poster.
The bus shelter posters,
bus shelter, yeah, it's
well, Warner Brothers
gorgeous.
went on a rampage about those. Like, those,
Were you working there at that time?
Yeah.
Tell the story, bitch.
Yeah, there were the bus shelter posters, which are kind of like the same size as the Italian quads. They're like 4 feet by 6 feet, and people were stealing them out of bus shelters for Batman
Breaking
Returns.
them, smash, and taking them out.
That and Nightmare Before Christmas were the two that really back to back just got, you know, so many bus shelters got hammered.
Wow.
And they would routinely send people out to close down shops that were selling them because they thought that they were from the vandals. But honestly, most of those posters came directly from the printers who made them.
Really?
They would run off extras and bring them in and sell them to shops.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the fucking Warner Brothers just like, they're busting bus stops. We have to stop it. It's like, no, we got them from extras. Man, that store is fucking amazing. You saw a lot of famous people come to it.
Yeah. And as a result of actually working at the photo counter there with John, who's now over at Larry Edmonds right down the street, I would often be pulling photos for extras on DVDs. And I'd always been interested in that. And I ended up working for Bill Lustig, who ran Blue Underground at the time. And he kind of trained me for what would be my next job, which would be licensing films. And it's something I'd always been interested in. And I started looking into it. And I was sort of like I was kind of a bootlegger. You know, I was like a guy who would buy Japanese laser discs and bump them down to videotapes. I've seen the director's cut of Dune about 100 times because of all the sides I had to flip to put that tape together. And you had to buy those 3-hour, you know, SP speed tapes. And so it was one of the things that you know, we did. And I like to say that I come from a long line of bootleggers and pirates. My grandfather was a bootlegger, and my dad's name was Walter. There's a Walter Kennedy in the Pirate Museum. But
And he's like a Seven Seas pirate. The other guy's a bootlegger.
And here I am, a video pirate. Yeah.
I watch movies I'm not supposed to.
Yes. Pull the shades. But I got kind of used to seeing what people wanted to get their hands on. And so I started looking into licensing films. And while I was acting, I got called out on a spot for a series, which was this kind of Reader's Digest condensed versions of Troma films. And as a result, it didn't get made. They shot the pilot, and it was something that I read on for a really long time, and they decided to go in a different direction when they finally went to shoot it. And but it brought me into contact with all the Troma people, and I ended up doing a lot of work with them and got Romeo and Juliet into regular release theaters, and like not just as midnight movies. It was the first time a Troma film had gone into regular release because I promoted the hell out of it at the nightclubs I worked at.
Really?
Yeah.
That's how it worked.
Yeah.
Fuck, dude. So you know, like James Gunn, was he there when you were there?
He was, but he was still in New York. So I was familiar with kind of who he was. Right. I met him once at a function where Lloyd was out, and also Roger Corman and one of the partners at his film company, the original company. And there was an award ceremony at UCLA, and so I met him very briefly, but I connected with him years later when he was shooting PG porn in front of Hollywood Book and Poster, actually, on my way to work. And then he started dating a friend of mine, and we became closer. And so I see him quite a bit.
The fuck, really?
Yeah, he's a great guy. He has not changed at all. He's exactly who he is. And he's a really, really cool guy. He's super good with fans. And I'm completely happy that the Guardians of the Galaxy universe is in his hands, because he's a very talented writer, too.
Yeah, he's a good dude, man. I always liked his work. It's real fucking like weird and wonderful.
Slither and Super.
Slither especially, man. It's a really wonderful flick. All right, so here, go to Two Shot. Now, we told you all of that just to kind of set up what we're about to really talk about, the true subject matter of today's show. That was just a long way of saying, hey, man, Matt's been around and he's got geek bona fides and stuff. One of the things he also likes to do, original artwork, comic book artwork. Tell him your Jack Kirby stories.
Okay. So I actually bought my first original artwork page, published original artwork page from Steve Bissett when I was like a 12-year-old kid working in a comic shop.
Steve Bissett was the Swamp Thing page?
Yeah.
Steve Bissett, John Totalbin worked on Alan Moore's Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
And later on, did they work on Rick Veitch's as well? I'm not sure if they went that. Did they?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that
Some of the greatest comics ever made.
Rick came in to replace Steve, but they were,
working together.
They're both from Vermont. And
That's wild. That's true.
And I'd always collected comic book art when I could. I loved it. That page actually got stolen at a convention, and obviously I haven't found it again. Or they're due to be dead. But,
it would be easy to find too.
It's
like
easy to
one
find.
of a kind.
Yeah. But I started collecting comic book art in the early '90s when Gaston and I were roommates, and when we were still at Fantastic Store, and before he left to do Meltdown, and I helped him do construction on that first store, shot his first commercial, and we bought entire comic books. And Glenn Danzig was actually the guy that...
You bought entire comic books full of artwork, original artwork.
Cover to cover, all the original pages. And Glenn Danzig had a huge collection of stuff, and sometimes he was like, oh, well, I don't mind letting go of this. And he knew what prices to set stuff at. And we had regular buyers for comic book art. And anybody from James Earl Jones to the Holland brothers, who wrote all the Motown hits. Holland, Dozier Holland is like on the publishing for every Motown hit. Their office was a block away from Fantastic Store, and they came in and they bought sports cards, and we converted them over to buying art pages.
Really? So you were like, these are fine, but like the real money's in comic book art.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they were like, they didn't necessarily know the titles, but they were interested in the investment opportunity, and they bought a lot of great stuff. So as we were doing this, I started accumulating like pages that I knew I wasn't going to sell, that were just like, I can't sell this. This is too great. And you'd sell stuff to buy more stuff. It's like the worst sales habit of all time. Violating the law of the street. Don't get high on your own supply.
It's tough not to. It's fucking so beautiful.
Yeah.
And you're realizing you're holding a one-of-a-kind piece of artwork.
Yeah.
Something that this belongs in a museum. You could frame it and put it up in a house. It's legitimate now.
Yeah.
20 years ago, people would be like, what's that? Now you put it up, people are like, Jesus Christ, that's fucking classic.
Yeah, they'll stand in front of your art with their wine glass.
Yes.
But the when I started working, and I came back to work at La Luz de Jesus after being gone, for years, and came back as the director of the gallery, and I put together a show that I spent about 3 years on, but honestly, I spent about 20 years on it.
A story of your life.
Yeah, and
Should throw up the artwork for the piece for the. What is it called? The
Pop-Sequentialism.
Pop-Sequentialism. It's the first picture we got.
And so I put together this show, and I realized when I was collecting all the artwork for the show that these types of original art pages required a lot more explanation than paintings. That generally, you put up the website or you put a show statement up for an artist in a gallery setting, and you've got their bio and a little bit of a show statement. But with comic art, to bring my fine art collectors into comic art, I had to educate them on why these pages were important.
Same way you did with the Holland brothers or whatever.
Right. And so it was, not necessarily about the first appearance of a character, though there were certainly some of those, but the importance of collaborations. And to me, the whole pivotal aspect of the Pop-Sequentialism show was collaborations between writers and artists, and why, it's important when you've got Garth Ennis, working
with
Steve Dillon on first Hellblazer and then Preacher. And I also wanted to shed a little bit more light.
I fucking forgot their run on Hellblazer.
Yeah.
Which was fantastic.
This is groundbreaking.
Yes. Fuck, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Pre-Preacher.
Yeah. And so the heroic aspect became my focus. And I always felt like superhero comics didn't get the respect that they deserved as art pieces. And certainly there were people that were finally starting to respect people like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and even Neil Adams and John Buscema. But, in the early 90s when we were buying Preacher pages at Comic-Con for $60.
I bought some of those pages.
Yeah. From Steve Dillon, it was a whole different world. And, back when Jack was still alive, Glenn Danzig had introduced us to his work and his availability and let us know that, he just lives out in Thousand Oaks. You can just give him a call. And I did. I got the number from Glenn and I called up Jack Kirby. And Jack Kirby answered the phone.
Give him a single. This man talked to Jack Kirby. Go ahead.
So I called up Jack, and hello. I was like, hi, my name is Matt Kennedy. I got your number from Glenn Danzig, and I'd like to buy some comic book art. And he was like, okay, come on over. And so I did. I took 3 buses to his house because I didn't have a car, and brought my checkbook and my wallet. And he had gotten back all the pages that Marvel had never released to him, just recently. And if you remember the old Eclipse comic books, all the back covers of all the Eclipse comic books had a picture of Jack Kirby, and it said, Marvel's 25th anniversary is this year. What about Jack?
Right.
And Jack had his arms crossed, and he had kind of a furrowed brow. And so all this stuff was just piled around his workstation, his like little home office. And his wife answered the door, and she made us like tuna fish sandwiches. And I went in and looked at stuff. He's like, what do you like, Kennedy? What do you like? I was like, oh, Thor. Can't have Thor. How about this beautiful Captain America page? And out of nowhere, he produces this oversized Captain America page, and it was the centerfold of the Bicentennial Marvel Treasury Edition. And it's got Cap and every character from Captain America on it. And he was like, I'll tell you what, let's play some checkers. And if you win, it's $300. And if I win, it's $400.
Oh my God.
I was like, okay. And Jack Kirby cheated at checkers. If you heard a noise and I turned my head, his hands were on the board, and then you'd turn around and his arms would be like folded, like, your move, kid, your move.
He mesmerized you with Kirby dots.
Yes.
Fucking win the game.
Zipatone all over the place. But he actually he won the game, and he honored the original price. And I brought it home in the bus, and realized that, that comic art was really a unifying thing, that, people on the bus were kind of like a little curious, like, why is this kid holding this thing, this giant drawing, and very carefully. And there was like a total like gangbanger type kid, and he came over and he sat next to me. He's like, what you got there, Holmes? And I was like, oh, this is a Captain America page. He was like, that's pretty fucking cool. And I was like, oh, that's awesome, And that kind of led me,
It's a blanket, dude. A blanket of security.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? People
Literally
yes.
a blanket of security. And it kind of led me down the road. And I started reaching out to other people who were my heroes. But it really set me up for wanting to bring this artwork to a wider audience. And Luz de Jesus had done that before I came along, in 1986 when Billy Shire set up the gallery. He had given shows to people like Robert Williams and Joe Coleman, and then did the Zap 13 show when I was working with him on Melrose as just like a shop manager, not as a gallery director. And the Zap 13 show was like all the classic underground guys. So Robert Crumb, Moscoso and Spain, and it was just incredible. And superhero comic just didn't get that respect. Like
those two never really, in my experience, never really crossed off. Like I remember when I was a hardcore comic book reader, collector in the late 80s, early 90s. Like there were wizard people later on, and there were comics journal people.
Yeah.
And those two never really crossed over. CBG, Comics Buyer's Guide, was somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
As a newspaper, but Comics Journal, like they weren't like fuck superheroes, but they're like only 10 people, 5 could do superheroes anymore, and the rest was more about everything else that wasn't a superhero.
You remember Amazing Heroes?
Yes.
And the pre-wizard, really.
Yes.
And that was really the divide, and I remember that. And I also remember reading some of those amazing Gary Groth, diatribes in Comics Journal.
Yes.
But he still sort of had a love-hate relationship with superheroes.
Yeah.
And he would still have, Gil Kane interview Robert Crumb or something like that. And so there was still like a lot of coverage for superhero stuff. And then when they went to the kind of quarterly Perfect Bound version of it, there was no love for superheroes.
No.
I mean, the only person who wrote superhero comics that gets covered in the Comics Journal is Grant Morrison.
Yeah.
And it's because his stuff is very different and has that appeal to people who don't like superhero comics.
Right.
So I put together the Pop-Sequentialism show, and I realized I've written like 80 pages of descriptions because you had to. And so I thought, well, I'm not just going to put this up online. I'm going to publish this.
Nice.
And so we'd already published 40 books with La Luz de Jesus Press through Last Gasp. And so we put it out, and it's out there in the world, and it's become kind of a price guide for original comic book art.
Nice. Where can they find it?
You can get it at laluzdejesus.com. Any place that carries Last Gasp product, they can get it there. There's a Pop-Sequentialism.com as well.
Thanks for hanging out with us here today. I'm Fat Man, I'm Batman Man. I've been Kevin Smith. This is Matt Kennedy. Go visit La Luz de Jesus in Los Angeles, and come back next episode right here. Same fat time, same fat channel. Smodcast.com/Kevin Smith. Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith. Thanks for watching. Do me a favor, click that thing below that says subscribe. Every time you click that, you save a baby kitten from murder.